Now I've had, 4 amputations, 3 revisions afterwards. So setbacks, man, here's reality. I don't care what you're doing. If you think you're going to go through it without any setbacks, you're sadly mistaken. So you should just embrace the suck, because it's going to happen. And when you have setbacks, you have to deal with it. So the better and the faster you can deal with that and accept it, okay, I've had a setback. Yes, this sucks, but it's not going to end me. It's not going to beat me, and I'm not going to stop. You have to tell yourself those 3 things and then continue on.
Welcome to Mindset Lessons from the Field. I'm Gina Cazazza, the author of the upcoming memoir, Training with a SEAL. And today on the show, we have a retired Green Beret Special Forces Communications Sergeant who enlisted in the Army on September 11th and graduated Special Forces March of 2006. He was the Director of Program and Services at the Green Beret Foundation. And currently, today, he spends his time working with Adaptive Training Foundation, where he helps mentor others and gives back not just to veterans, but also first responders and civilians. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce you to Randy Nantz. So Randy, thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Gina. Yes.
I'm excited to talk to you. First of all, your story is awesome. It's an incredible story. And I want to get right into it because, well, you joined the service in September 11th. I mean, it was like, that was the pivotal moment where you were like, my country needs me. I'm ready to go. And you had a family at that time. And if I am correct, you were also in your early 30s. Is that correct?
Yep, 33. Yep, and had two children, that at that time were 1 and 6.
Wow. Oh my gosh. You went overseas and you were working with special forces, right? And you realized like, these are the guys I want to be more around compared to the people you were currently with. Is that correct?
Somewhat. So I was a private in 3rd ID. I was in the infantry. I was just a regular grunt private, where we did come into contact with some ODAs a couple of different times, but I didn't specifically work with them. But enough and close enough, it didn't take a rocket scientist to look at me and, the dudes I was with and look at those guys and go, man, that's where I need to be right there. Because I could tell, one, from their equipment, how they were dressed, but then the autonomy they had, you know what I mean? I was a private, you're locked, even in combat, you're pretty much in a little box. You don't know a whole lot either. You only have enough for that day, basically, and what we're doing. You don't really have this freedom to go move and make decisions and that kind of thing, which I noticed that they did, and all our officers and commanders were listening to these guys, and so that's where I came into contact with them. And I'm like, okay, because originally on it, when I first went in, it wasn't till September 11th was the determining factor. But it wasn't until the 27th of September when I went down to the MEPS building in downtown Dallas and signed the paperwork. And so I wanted a Ranger contract at that time. I wanted to become a Ranger. But by the 27th, there was a lot of people that enlisted that came into the service after September 11th. And in fact, when I went down on the 27th, here in Dallas, MEPS is a 4-story building. And literally, it was packed. It was standing room only. They didn't have enough place for all the people in there. And there were a bunch of older guys like I am now, prior service, trying to get back in, but they wouldn't allow them at that time. But I went down and I get in with I go through all the stuff, and I finally get in with the job counselor, and he's like, well, there's no airborne slots left. There's no Ranger slots. There's none of that. We've had too many people. But then he sells, I've got it, but I got a really good deal for you. And it comes with an $18,000 sign-on bonus. So I'm not sure I heard anything after that. I like that part, and so that's kind of how it happened. And then he had me, I didn't go unassigned. You can actually sign up and put unassigned, and somewhere in your journey and basic training, they'll figure out where you're going to go. But since I had a family already, he suggested that I pick a slot, and it came up to be near Savannah, Georgia, which also sounded nice, but was completely not. being at Fort Stewart isn't the funnest thing as a private. I'll just tell you that, because, you know, anytime you're out in training, which is months at a time, it's in a swamp basically. But, you know, it was where I got my start. I did go to the initial invasion with them through Iraq, and that was a very important and a powerful moment for that unit. You know, and I was in 2-7 Infantry, and the cool little fact about them is, you know, in the Army, when you have a battalion or even a company, but they have their colors, right? They have their flag, and then they'll have streamers. All these streamers are what battles they've been in, and 2-7 has, you know, their streamers are like this wide and they're probably this long, but it had about this many, because it goes all the way back to the War of Independence. We're called the cotton balers. And the reason 2-7 Infantry are the cotton balers is because we're the same unit that hid behind the cotton bales in the War of 1812 when the British came back to try to reclaim us. So it's a pretty cool factoid or history fact about the 2-7 Infantry where I started out. But, you know, when I got back, I made plans to go to selection right away, and that kind of started the journey there.
So I want to ask you two questions from that. So number one, what did you see aside from, was there any physical trait or trait that they all seem to have, like personality wise, that you saw in them that you didn't see in the Green Berets that you're working with, that you didn't see within your team?
Well, so one, yes, they definitely had the competence. And like I said, we watched them and our commanders listening to these guys like they were, you know, like they were the man. And you know, you don't see that every day. You know, normally, whether you're in a company or a battalion element, whoever the commander of that is, they're the top dog. You know what I mean? Everybody's listening to them most of the time, unless they're asking someone a question. But then to see these other guys, you know, again, and take a look at them, you could, at this point, you could see the difference. You know what I mean? And so, and then there were a couple of operations that we got to see them move, where they had channeled the bad guys in for us, and some other things through a different ambush. And there was definitely a difference, a clear difference.
Now, when you went into special forces, you were how old?
So I went through the Q course at 34 and 35 years old, basically.
That's a huge jump from what normally people go through, and what you're about to go through during that time is not easy, and it takes a really big toll on the body. So when you were ready to go to special forces, did you do training up to that point? What was it like for you? Did your body break down at any point throughout it? How did you keep on going? Because a 34-year-old body is very different from a 20-year-old body, or a 24-year-old body, or even a 7-year-old body. Yeah. Yeah.
Remarkable difference, in fact.
Yeah.
So yeah, so once I got back and I went and talked to the recruiters, because SF recruiters are different than your regular recruiters, right? They're not showing up at the high schools.
Mhm.
These guys are on installation. So Fort Stewart actually had an office where there were 2 or 3 Green Beret guys that are now doing recruiting time. Because in your military career, it doesn't matter, certainly in the Army, even if you're an operator, you either have to go do cadre time or you have to do recruiter time. So either be a teacher or recruit. And so these guys picked recruiting, and they were on Fort Stewart. Once I went and talked to them, then all the time, all I was ever doing was, you know, doing push-ups, pull-ups, running, and rucking with weight. And I did a lot of that, because you got, you know, rucking with weight, you know, because, you know, when you go to selection, you're going to have 4 runs. You have 2 short runs and 2 long runs. Same thing with the ruck marches. You have 2 long runs, 2 short and 2 long. You don't know the distances. They don't tell you. I don't know to this day. I know the long ones, they were long. The short ones seem fairly long. So I, all the way up until I showed up to the Q course, that's all I did. And then lunges.
Did you do that on your own, or did they tell you?
Oh, yeah, no. This was an addition. Yeah, yeah.
You doing all this on your own. First of all, 34-year-old mindset, very different from a 24-year-old mindset. I feel like you have a little bit more maturity. You have more self-discipline, hopefully, by this point. How was it for you, like, sticking to that, especially someone who has a family? You know, what you're about to do is not easy by any means. And how was that for you?
Well, so it was because, well, the good thing about it was for me, I was in the Army. And once I passed selection and I came back to my company, they were basically like, well, all right, good job, buddy. They didn't want, they were kind of hoping I didn't make it. They really even told me, some of them like, look, Nance, people go all 21 days and don't get selected. And we've had all kinds of people go and they don't get selected. And I'm like, hey, I get it. I get it. But I'm still going to go. Up till I went to selection, I still did all that preparation, but I did more even after selection. But that's because once I got back, my unit was like, almost like I didn't have a job for a few months. It was
Did
kind of
that
crazy.
fuel you then to
Oh yeah. Well, I
want to
just did
get
more.
through?
I just trained more
Yeah.
because I didn't have anything to do anyway. I was training. And then I also, after hours and weekends, my wife, my ex-wife then, and kids went with me. We went and did the runs. We would do the ruck marches, and the kids would be on bikes. If we were running, my ex-wife would be on a bike. I would be the only one running.
Now, how did it feel for you, and what was going on in your mind when you're essentially, your team, which at the time, any career and job, when you're with your coworkers, it's like this little family in a way, how did it feel knowing that they abandoned you and was not looking for you to succeed?
Well, so they didn't abandon me, but what they were trying to do beforehand was so that in case I didn't, maybe I didn't just crash mentally. I don't know. But I know that they were worried that I would go and not get selected and then I would change. I'm not sure. Afterwards, they were happy for me. And it's kind of the way it goes, like when you're going to be retiring, or when it comes and you've got orders and you're going to be going to another installation. There's a certain period of time your job just says, well, all right, go do what you have to do, take care of business. So in the end, they didn't abandon me. I thought it was pretty cool, actually, because I didn't have to show up at formation every morning. I didn't have to go do all the things they were doing throughout the day. And so I just went and trained, because I knew it was going to be tough, and then even when I went to selection, that was 3 weeks. It was tough because one, I went December 5th is when I took my PT test in 2003. It was December 5th. I went down to the recruiter station. They took us and a group of guys that they wanted to test out, and we all went and did our PT test. And so after that's done, I easily passed because I maxed mine out. As soon as that happened, they took me back in. Okay, you're in, no doubt. And so they said, well, when do you want to go? I'm like, man, when's the soonest I can go? And they're like, all right, we like this kind of guy. That's the kind of answer we want to hear. And they have this old crusty dude in the corner that's in his desk but facing the wall, and they ask him, and he's like, he looks up at his calendar and he says, well, we might still be able to, if we get the paperwork in now, we might be able to get him in the January class. And I'm like, that's it, sign me up. And the old dude wheels around in his chair, wheels around. He's like, look here, buddy. And he said some other words, of course. Don't you be having me fill out this paperwork if you're not going to show up. And I said, hey, listen here, buddy. I told you I was going to be there. I'm going to be there. So then I leave and I'm all, who's that guy think he is? But then I go home and I start thinking, oh, crap. The farthest north I've been is Georgia, where I'm at now. I grew up in Southeast Texas, you know what I mean, and North Texas. So I was like, man, it's going to be cold. It's January in North Carolina at Fort Bragg. This is bad. So I think about it for a couple of days and I'm like, man, I can't back out. Now I can't tell them I need to go in March. You know what I mean? A better weather patterns. And so I'm like, dang, man, now I already told that guy I'm going to be there. He's doing the paperwork. So I'm like, well, I'm just going to go up there and ask him what I need to do to prepare for it. I go in and luckily for me, there's only one guy. I'm like, perfect. I don't have to do this in front of everybody. I'm like, so I looked at him and his name was Sergeant First Class Pumphrey. He was a 7th Group guy that was from Bragg. At that time, 7th Group was still at Bragg. and he was on a dive team. So I knew because I saw the pictures behind his desk. And so I said, hey, son. He goes, what you got today, Nantz? What do you need? I said, well, Sergeant, I realized that, I'm going to be in North Carolina in January and it's going to be freaking cold. And I'm a Texas boy. So, what do I need to do? Is there anything I can do to prepare for that? And this guy lets out the heartiest, the biggest laugh you've ever heard in your life, man. He is just laughing, And when he stops, he says, look here, you can't prepare for suck. You just have to embrace it. And I was like, oh gosh. That was the first time I'd ever heard, you have to embrace the suck. The very first time. That was, sometime in mid-December of 2003. And I was like, okay, fair enough. And, he was right. It was 2004, they had the SOPSI program going, which you may or may not be aware of. And I think it still is today. So anytime we start having a serious conflict or we have shortages, one of the things the Green Berets have done, or for special forces, and they did it in the 70s, some of those guys were command sergeant majors that were over me now, but they were called SF babies back then. Like when I walked into the recruiter, you couldn't sign up for special forces.
Mhm.
You could sign up for Ranger if there was a slot, and you could sign up for infantry or any other job in the Army. But you're not going to be able to just specifically say, I want to be a Green Beret, sign up, and then get a contract that says that. However, when they turn these programs back on, this one's called the 18 X-ray program. That's what happened. Like literally right after I went to basic training, they started this. And, I just missed it by this much. And so now someone can go and sign up to be a Green Beret. You go to basic training. Now there's a psychological eval that goes through. They have to check to make sure you can pass it or get at least a secret clearance for you to do this. And then they put you in the program. And so you go through basic training, then you go through airborne, then you go to Bragg for something called SOPSI 1. And that's where some old SF guys like me are like Ranger cadre now, right? And they're running a little schoolhouse to train these guys up, and they scuff them up pretty good, and they teach them how to do land nav. Then they go to selection. And then after selection, if they got selected, which most of them at that time were, they went to SOPSI 2, and then they went and entered the Q course like the rest of us. That option wasn't available when I came in. It did not exist. Literally weeks after, when I was in basic training, it came available. And so I wasn't able to get into that. But when I went to my cadre that I told you about that were the recruiters, they told me about these guys. They said there's going to be a bunch of 18 X-ray guys there, young kids. They're going to be physical specimens. They will have went through basic training, airborne, and now SOPSI 1. Don't even try to keep up with them. You just let them go do what they do. What we're looking for is consistency. So do your job, do the best you can, and then, you can't have one fast run and one slow run. You know what I mean? They have to be consistent. You have to, because it's the same reason they don't tell you how long it is or anything else. They just tell you start running. If there's a turn, they'll be notated by cones, or there'll be a cadre there telling you to go to turn. And otherwise, you run until you find all the cadres and trucks. And so you have to be able to motivate yourself, basically, is what that is. So, you know what I mean? If you don't have any other information and you don't have anything, will you still push through and drive as hard as you can? And that's kind of what they look for in selection, right? And so they told me, don't even try to keep up with these guys. And they were right. These kids were physical specimens. It'd been a couple of years since I'd been to basic training. Now, if I'd went to basic training airborne, SOPSI 1, I would have been right with them. However, I still beat some of them. And it was so cold that year in January, for the first time ever, some of those guys quit. Some of the SOPSI kids quit in the middle of all the snow and ice that we had during that selection. It was ridiculous. It was very cold. Like the day we did the obstacle course, it was 19 degrees. And it's like every other special operations course. They don't care what the weather is outside. They don't care how cold or hot it is. You're wearing the same uniform. And you can't wear any snivel gear. So any of the stuff that would keep you warm, you don't get to wear. And so it was very, 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 very cold and brutal, in fact.
So couple of things I want to ask you from that. Number one, you said you need the mindset and the motivation to push yourself to get to the end of the race and all that stuff. And then you also said, from Texas, I'm not used to the cold. I have to learn to embrace the suck. Let's go on two things. Number one, how do you push yourself and motivate yourself to keep on keeping on? And then the other thing is, how did you deal and handle the cold? Were there moments where you were like, where it was on your mind 24/7, where you were about to quit, where anything like that, in terms of how did you get through something that was not something you were prepared for?
The first thing is, yes. One, I think one of the things that's detrimental to having that push and drive is you have to really want it. You have to want whatever it is you're seeking. You have to really want it, and it has to be more important than anything else, which is why they want you to still be able to push and why they don't give you any information. Anybody can go if they have all the information, they know exactly how long they have to go and all this. It's most people won't just push themselves through something if they don't have all the answers. And then when it came to the cold, man, it was brutal. It was very, very cold. And at times it was, unbearable. But the thing is, you had to always have your rucksack had to at least have 45 pounds in it. It couldn't be any lighter. And there would be times that they would just spot check you on the site and come weigh it. And if your ruck didn't weigh, that was an honor violation. You got kicked out right then. So, and we watched it happen because some people would put food in there and water and then weigh it. And once they ate all the food and drank the water, it wasn't 45 pounds anymore, and, got caught and they got kicked out. So you have to really want it. You know what I mean? It has to be important to you. And then you have to be willing to take whatever they're going to dish out to you and not quit. You have to have a no quit attitude, no matter what they do, no matter how long they smoke me, no matter how tired I get, no matter how cold it gets, or even that fact, how hot in some areas, you're just not going to quit. Nothing is going to make you quit. And you have to set that in your mind first. It's kind of like the old Little League baseball adage, right? You have to know what you're going to do with the ball when the pitcher's throwing. You have to know beforehand what you're going to do with the ball if it's hit to you. It's the same concept. You have to know that you want this and that it means something to you and that you're going to do it regardless. And certainly in any kind of special operations, whether it's selections or any of the training of or the train up to, just like once you pass selection, you're not a Green Beret. You still got to go through 2 years of courses to get there. So, it is. And I will say there was a moment on the STAR course, which is land nav portion, right? And they wake you up at like 12 in the night and they kick you out at 1 in the morning and you start going and finding, and you got 4 points to find in a very large area in the woods. And I remember I had gotten lost, or I'd overshot my point, right? And now I wasn't exactly sure where I was. It's in the middle, and it's pitch black. There's no light whatsoever. And I'm in the middle of the woods in North Carolina. It is freezing cold. And I overshot my point and I started getting frustrated, and started getting mad. And it took me a minute. And so I had to sit down and I actually used the restroom. And then I sat there for about 10 minutes, and let myself calm down and become relaxed. And I was like, okay, what do I need to do? And then I realized, okay, I need to find a known point on the map, but something that's close to me. So when I'm looking at my map now, I do see there's a church that's not very far. And I'm probably not far from it. And I do find the church. So now I know where I'm on the map again. And then I just shot, an azimuth back to the point and went back to it and got it, but it was in that moment, those 10 minutes, a lot of people quit. There was a lot of people that got to that moment in the Q course and then just stopped, just figured this, okay, this isn't for me. I don't know what they thought, but we know that people had quit doing that. I heard the stories, and I tell people all the time, being out at Camp McCall is where all the Q course takes place, and it's 45 minutes outside of Fort Bragg. And you can feel the misery coming out of the ground when you walk onto this place. And I didn't really understand that when I first got there. But by the time I spent 2 years there, I'd seen more grown men cry like babies because their dream just ended. I mean, a legitimate cry that, I still haven't seen that to this day again. But in those 2 years, I saw it quite a few times. And it gives me chill bumps thinking about it right now. You know what I mean? Because honestly, I probably would have cried real tears if my dream ended right there as well. But I just wasn't willing to give up on it on times that it got hard or I got lost.
Did your body ever break down on you? Was there,
Oh,
you're
yeah.
34, like you said, don't even think about keeping up with these guys. What happened physically to you during training? Not at, like, I want to know during the training part, what was breaking?
Mine came fortuitously because there was a point before we hit the STAR course, they send you through these practical exercises. They're PEs, right? Practical exercises. And so these were little things to train you up on land nav, because one of the things they do is they take you, if you didn't, it's probably best if you didn't know one thing about land nav or a compass. And then they take you through the schoolhouse portion where they show you how to use a compass. They show you all the techniques and all these other things. And then they send you out for a couple of days in these practical exercises to go do land nav to see if you got it down or not. And during the first day, I came across a point that on my map, it's a candy striped road, right? And a candy striped road, for all we knew, were hardball roads. All like the freeway or the highway, the North Carolina State Highway, that was one of the cutoff areas that you could not go past, was a candy striped road on the map. And it's because it was a highway, it was a paved road. Well, I'm looking at Candy Strap Road and my point's right next to it. And I get to where there's a road, but it's an improved dirt road. And I didn't know that they could count those as a candy striped road either. So I'm thinking I need to keep going. And I passed this point up, and it turns out I only get 2 points because of it, because I go another click and a half and hit the hard ball. And now I know it's not the right spot. And I go all the way back, and that was the right point. We only got 2 that day, so I had to get special treatment after that. I got 2 out of 4. So the next time I'm out on my own, same thing happens. Around my second point, some reason I get lost, I get mad, I get confused. I dial myself back in, and I get the second point, and now I've got an hour and a half time left of the block, and I look at the point the guy gave me, and when I put it on the map, it's 6 clicks away. That's 6,000 meters. That's a little over a mile. So I know I've got to hump it now. You know what I mean? Because walking on the road is completely different than walking through the woods. You know what I mean? There's walking through terrain. You're not just going to hump out and go to a mile in a few minutes. That's not going to happen. And so I knew I was going to have to run. And so I started running, and I had to cross what was called Big Muddy. There's a ton of draws in the woods here, which is why people get lost. And draws are like big, huge ditches, but they still have all kinds of growth in them too. It's not like this is all empty ground. And even though the vegetation is back a little bit because it's winter, it's still there. So at some point when I crossed Big Muddy, I found a place that was only knee deep in the water, and I went ahead and crossed it. When I got to the other side, I should have either tightened my laces or changed my socks or both. But I'm like, I don't have time. So I ran that whole way, and I made it in about an hour and 20 minutes to the point with about 10 minutes to spare. Pardon me. But I started getting blisters on the backs of my feet, on my heels. And those things continued to get worse over the next couple of days. And by the time I got to the STAR course, I was having to go to the medic. And this was the fortuitous part. Because I had these huge blisters, and I mean, these things were through the meat. They were bad. I've never seen, and I never had blisters that bad, never since. But I had to go to the medic, and he gave me all kinds of stuff to wrap them and to put moleskin in there to try to keep space so they weren't keep constantly getting rubbed. But the good thing was, then he gave me a bunch of 800 milligram of Motrin, and that saved my butt because I was sore. I was beat up from it, and then those things were hurting really bad. They were so bad, in fact, when we got to the very end, which is called team week, and they put you in teams, my whole team came to me and said, "Hey, we need to see your feet," because we had just went to chow right after they put us in teams, and I couldn't even keep up with them through the pea gravel to go to the chow hall. So they said, "We need to see your feet." And when I took my boots off, and all of them looked at my heels, all of them looked away. And for the rest of the night and that next morning, none of them would look me in the eye or the face. They would look away because this is what people do. It's just human nature. I saw it happen to other people. When some guy's not going to make it, that's what starts happening to them. People kind of pull away. They don't look at them, and that's what they were doing to me because they didn't think I was going to make it. Well, our team week now was only down to 3 days. And so for us, the third day is the finish day, and it's where you also do all the evaluations and the testing at the end. But we did 82 clicks in 48 hours. That's 50 miles is what that means. And we did that in 48 hours because the way it works, of course, it's selection. We got our first mission as a team. They give you your point. They give you a time frame, and you have to make it there, right? And so I think we made our first one on time, or maybe a little late, but it was only about 3.5 clicks. Then it went to 5 clicks, then 8, then 12, then 12, because then they give you shorter time frames that you're not going to make. And so then you get penalized. And so we were penalized all the way through. And I was not the one holding us back. By the time it was over, we went to sleep at 3:30 in the morning, and we had to be back up at 5:30 so we could meet our cadre for the last event. We didn't know it was going to be the last one. That's what it turned out to be, thank goodness. But we had to meet him at 6. And I was the one that got everybody up. I was the only one that woke up to my watch alarm after 2 days of marching and then only 2 hours of sleep. And I got everybody up, got everybody, let's go, got everybody fired up and moved on. And I was not the one that held us back. And so by the time we were in, you have 12 guys on the team, right? And they give you everybody, once you get done and you get to the finish, you get a red card and you get a blue card. The red card's the guy you don't think should be here. The blue card is who you think the man was. You know what I mean? And I got 7 out of 12 of those blue cards and no red cards. So
how much pain was your feet in?
Oh my gosh, man, it was brutal.
How did you keep going? How did you push it out of your mind? Tell me about that part.
Well, there were times that I was able to, that did help for minutes. But if we got anywhere near water, I would break the ice and stick my feet down in there the whole time we were resting, 5 or 10 minutes. And then they would be numb by the time I would left. But even that brings its challenges. But again, it comes back to I was not going to quit. Nothing was going to make me stop. Nothing was going to make me quit. And nothing was going to make me fail. So no matter what.
Think about it at all? Did it come in and you just had to push it out?
Oh, yeah,
Every time
absolutely.
you thought about the pain, you had to push it out?
Honestly, I prayed a lot.
Yeah.
I would pray because that's what I grew up in church. So that was something that it brings me strength. And so I would pray. And then other times I would use the old self-talk adage. Instead of cussing myself, I was telling myself, good thing, you can do this. You got this. It's only a little bit further. How? And the old adage, hard times don't last, hard men do. Or hard people, I should say, in today's times. But that's the truth of the matter. And so I kept pushing. That last event, in fact, was we had to put together these huge pipes and a plywood over the top because we had all this product to carry. And I want to say it was probably 400 pounds worth. And so I saw pictures of selection not long ago. And excuse my French, but these bastards had wheels. They got to put wheels on there. We had no wheels. We had to carry it on our shoulders. And in fact, we had to put enough people to carry this load underneath it. And then everybody else that wasn't carrying the load had to carry somebody else's pack. So the people that weren't under the load, which was extremely heavy, even with all the guys we had under it, you had 2 backpacks full of, at least 90 pounds worth of stuff on you to carry along with you. So while we moved this thing, I want to say a couple of miles up the road, no joke. And we had one guy that had one little tiny blister he was an E6. I was an E4 at the time. This guy's a staff sergeant. He's an E6. He is a supervisor. He's a leader, supposed to be. And he cried and whined about this one little blister the whole way. I can't tell you how many times, I still remember to this day, he would start crying and I would see people look over at me. The sad part is he got every one of the 12 red cards. Well, 11. He didn't give himself the red card. Everybody else gave him their red card, and the first sergeant came and talked to us about this guy afterwards, just to make sure, and the funny, he asked us, and the truth was none of us even talked about that. Well, we didn't have time. We didn't know this was going to be the last event. We're praying to God it is, but you don't know when it's going down that this is going to be it. And then basically they said, okay, that's it, index. And we're like, oh, thank God. Because, index means it's over. Mm-hmm. And then they rush you into a room and you do 3 hours worth of paperwork right away. So there was no talking about it. We didn't plan it. This guy deserved it, and that's how that went.
Today's podcast episode is brought to you by my absolute favorite company. If you know me or seen videos or photos of me, then you know I always have one on my wrist. I absolutely adore this company, DiscoverOmnia.com. DiscoverOmnia.com is the world's first smart crystal bracelet. Every single bracelet is handmade in the USA using real genuine crystals made on memory wire. Every bracelet is unisex and they're also aromatherapy. The cool part is the black onyx charm that is on the bracelet. It scans to your cell phone, connecting you to their Wellness Hub Elevate. You can also access their Wellness Hub Elevate on your computer or tablet. You just have to sign into your account. The bracelet gives you a 12-month membership. It has over 200 pieces of self-care content, from motivational tips, meditations, breathing exercises around the theme of your bracelet, printable journals, and so much more. The content is ever growing. And that's not all. The bracelet also gives you lifetime access to their Elevate Together Club, which meets monthly via Zoom. Each month is themed, giving you actionable takeaways to elevate your life. And with this podcast episode, you got 40% off your purchase order by using the code Mindset Podcast. Use that code Mindset Podcast for 40% off. Just go to DiscoverOmnia.com. DiscoverOmnia.com, code Mindset Podcast for 40% off. Get your bracelet today. Did any members of your team, did they all make it through? Did anyone quit during that time?
No. During the team week portion, no one quit. But the 3 weeks, the time before, mm-hmm. many people quit. In fact, I was on a team. No, I'm sorry, that was phase 2. Never mind. But yes, there would be times, and it was like what you see sometimes in the movie here. People talk about, you'd go to bed and everybody would be there, or the people that hadn't quit yet, and you'd wake up and there'd be 2 or 3 empty bunks. Where in the middle of the night they just got up quietly, packed their stuff, and headed over to the tent. That meant you were a voluntary withdrawal.
So you said something really interesting that I feel like a lot of civilians and just every person can kind of relate. I say all the time sometimes, I just wish I had a crystal ball to just see, like, am I going to hit the target that I'm heading towards? Am I on the right path? Like, I just want to just give me a glimpse. If not, then I know. If I am, great, but I want to see it. And the thing is, sometimes it's really, really hard to continually move forward towards a target, towards a goal, to the end of your journey of what you're trying to accomplish without knowing anything about it, without knowing when you're going to hit that end? How do you trick your mind into continually going, even without having no control about everything and not knowing anything? Everything is completely in the unknown.
Well, it comes down to, yes, you do have to want it, but you're right. In those moments where you start to have self-doubt or you start to wonder, and I think that's why they do it, that you don't have all that information because they need the people that are going to at some point go, you know what? I have every confidence in what I'm doing. I know I'm doing it right and I'm doing the best I can. So I'm just going to keep going. And if it turns out that I missed the mark, then so be it. I did the best I could and I never gave up. But I still believe there's a strong possibility we're doing this right, we're going to be right, and we just keep going. You have
Now,
to push all that self-doubt out. You have
yeah.
to push out the, man, I need to know all this information or I can't do that. If you can't do that, you're not going to make it. You're just not, because and some people are that way. You're right. Some people have to know that information so they can push themselves to it. You have to be able to push yourself when you don't know all that. And that is a very hard place to do that. And I think it is what separates the men from the boys, so to speak, or the doers from the not doers, or the talkers, we'll say.
Yeah.
The doers
Well,
and
the
the
unknown,
talkers.
it's the unknown. The unknown is absolutely terrifying. But when if you think about it, like from birth, like most things you do, it becomes unknown, like,
That's right.
and like I remember my parents put me in soccer when I was 5. I didn't know what soccer was. I didn't know anything about it. That's the unknown. And it's the same thing as you progress throughout life. But the thing is that like as you progress throughout life, you also develop more and more fears. And
Yes.
those fears stop you. And again, it's just getting through that unknown. And I want to segue into your story on what happened to you in combat. Let me just quickly give a brief overview on the fact that you graduated Special Forces March of '06.
Yes.
That same year, December of '06, you were in an accident in combat that ended up taking your leg, correct? Well,
Well, it
it's
wasn't an
up to the
accident, but
knee. It was the
yes,
knee.
there was an event.
The blast that happened where you got burned from the knee to the ankle, 3rd-degree burn type deal. It was very serious. You were in the hospital. And I mean, that ended your career. Was it you retired that later, the following year, right?
No, I didn't medically retire till 2012.
2012. Okay.
So, it did effectively end my military job and eventually my military career. However, you missed one of the most important parts. So today, and I tell people all the time that it removed pretty much 50% of each cheek as it went by. So now I'm a legitimate half-ass. So, that's the truth of the matter. Now, normally I get a much better laugh out of that, but, usually it's in front of a lot of people. And it's amazing how many people laugh at that, but it's true. So, yes, I was in it's called an EFP. So it's still an IED, a roadside bomb, but it's the more deadly one. It's definitely the more damaging one. And it's a shape charge. What that means in engineering terms is all the energy is focused in one direction. Like if a mine blows up, the energy dissipates in a 360-degree bubble, right? Well, now this weapon system focuses all that energy in one direction. It's kind of like driving in front of a cannon when it goes off. And they do have a copper plate on the outside because copper heats up so fast. And it basically turns this thing into a gas bullet because the copper heats up to its gas and then it goes right through. So we don't have a vehicle, not the M1 Abrams, not any of the RG vehicles, not one vehicle in our arsenal that this thing didn't go in one side and out the other. It's that dangerous, it's that deadly, it's that powerful. So fortunately for me, it grazed me and it only took off my rear end. Many guys that survived this are missing both legs. And many people that didn't survive it were cut in half, literally, in an instant.
Now, you said something where you just said, I'm grateful that that was all that came out of that. But when you were in the hospital, going through all this, it was super difficult. You're in a lot of pain.
Oh,
It
man.
took 2 to 3 years to get over that initial injury, and then you went through years and years and years of still like of going through all
Yes.
that.
Yes.
So let's talk about that time. Let's talk about the fact that it was your first year. You finally get into special forces. You finally got the position that you were going for 2 years, and then all of a sudden an injury happened, and out of your control, and now you're in the hospital and you're in excruciating pain and you don't know what's going on. What you said you were angry a lot. So what was going on through your mind, and how are you getting through this?
Well, the strange part was when it happened, and I was fully involved. When my legs went on fire, they were on fire. That's I had, I'm missing the fingertips. I had facial wounds. I had inhalation wounds. So it was a serious deal, but I didn't feel any pain. I'm certain I was in shock for one, but I was also very mad because they got me, and I wasn't going to finish the mission. I wasn't going back with my dudes to the team house. And you're right, I just spent 2 years of hard work to attain where I'm at. And now, you know, I'd worked on ambulance earlier in my life, so I was kind of trying to tell myself it's not as bad as I think. So I never felt any pain the entire time. Even, I got to the cache within 45 minutes. They put me under, went to surgery. Now, 5 days later, I woke up and I was in San Antonio, Texas. And I was in such pain that when I woke up, I didn't have to ask myself if I was still alive. I knew I was, because I was in that much pain, and it was a lot. And so it was a very, very trying time period. I spent almost 4 weeks in the burn ICU in just excruciating pain, and I couldn't move my legs from the nerve damage. At this time I didn't really do it much, but once I got out of the hospital and was back, with my family, although we weren't at home, we were still in San Antonio. We were in the guest house. I would have to move my legs to in the bed because I couldn't move them. It was a very humbling time period, and the pain was significant, and it was rough. I'm not gonna lie. It was very tough. But for the first 6 months, I was still telling myself I was going back. That was one of the first things I said. I'm going back. I don't care what happened. I don't care what I have to go through. I don't care what I have to do. I'm going to go back. Now that never came to fruition. But I ended up having now shoot, I've had the original amputation, and I've had 3 revisions. So it's been a long journey, and in fact, I was still recovering 8, 10 years out. And still in some ways, I think it's 17 now. I'm still recovering in some ways, you know what I mean, in residual areas. But it's just one of those things that the same old attitude came back. I'm not going to let this beat me. This is not going to define me, and it's definitely not going to beat me. So that's once, and then, like I said, it took 6 months to realize, okay. And I'd called my team sergeant before that and let them know that it was going to be a couple of years because they were still holding the slot on the team for me. And so I'm look, I'm not, it's going to be 2 or 3 years, they told me, before I can do anything from this. And so I just started the same old thing. You know what I mean? Okay, this is where I'm at, and here's where I want to be. So now I got to start making the steps to get there. And part of that was in doing all that recovery, getting them in there, working with my legs, walking, and doing all the things that you need to do to get back to being some resemblance of who you were before. You're never going to be that same. When something like this happens, that's life altering, it's one of those events that there will be before and after that event. And before, you're never going to be the same person you were before ever again. And there's nothing you can do about that, but you can still do the same things. There may be some additional challenges that you have to go through to do them, or you may have to do some more prep, whatever that is, whatever it looks like. That's what you have to do.
Where did the anger come from? What was it? Was the anger at all like, it didn't sound like you were in a victim mindset. So where did that anger come from when you were?
Well, it's one from the amount of pain. We're talking a significant amount of pain. You know, they had me on methadone maxed out. I was taking 340 milligrams 3 times a day. I was taking as much fentanyl as they could get in me and as much Dilaudid. So that's a lot of drugs, heavy drugs, in fact. And then the pain, I was angry about that. I don't know that I've ever really asked that question. And I don't think anybody else has ever either, of where the anger came from. I think it was, you know, because I knew maybe it was out of fear somewhat, and it was partly because, now I'm not on the team. And at a certain point, I knew I'm probably never going back to the team. And so some of that played into it. But I think just the pain and, I think I had a problem with anger too. It came to the point in 2010 where I finally realized that, because all my life, certainly as a youth male in the time period I grew up, everybody played baseball, everybody played football, everybody went out. It's not the way it is today, but it was then. However, I learned to use pain in high school football, anger, to get over pain. If you got hurt, one of the quickest ways you can get over being hurt is to get mad about it. And then in the military career, and certainly through combat and even in training, then it, became eternalized. I used it a lot. And I didn't realize how much I was using anger to get over areas of uncomfort, right? And so where it came to a head was my son went out one day to go skateboarding, and within 5 minutes, he already came back in. He's crying, and he's like 10 years old, and he's got his arm hanging down. He's holding his shoulder. I can see it's deformed a little bit. And he'd hit a rock, on the front wheel, and he went over the front. And now that he was 10, he was a little over 100 pounds. So it mattered. And it broke his collarbone. And he comes in and he's telling me this, and I started yelling at him, and I'm mad, and I'm yelling at him, and I don't even realize it. I do when he got this real bad, he did his face, he just kind of did this, and then he crumpled into the corner at the house we lived in Tampa. And right in that moment, I just stopped, and I'm like, what are you doing? Man, what are you doing? I was yelling at him like I was mad at him, but I wasn't mad at him per se. It's just how I learned to deal with it. Because in the military, if you got hurt, if someone else got hurt or I got hurt, I was going to get mad, because anger was going to get us through the next steps of whatever we had to do to get through what we're doing and with this casualty. And even in training, you're going to have to carry that guy. You know what I mean? So anger was something I used inappropriately at times, and way overused it. So I think that's some of that is where that came from, but also, just being got, they got you. Even though I wasn't on the team anymore, and, wasn't happy about it.
How can others that have anger issues that you've talked about, where they use it in an unhealthy way, what techniques do you have that helped calm you down or not use your anger anymore in a negative aspect?
First, you have to decide you're going to take self-accountability, right? You're going to own stuff. We all know people that won't own anything, even when it's completely their fault. You have to be able to willing to take ownership of what is your fault, or what your actions are. And then I started, I went and got some treatment. I talked to folks. I read some books. And what I learned is, and anytime I get angry, now I do it all the time, even in traffic. And if I start getting mad, and certainly if it's with someone I care about or love, or someone that I work with, that I respect, I start asking myself questions. The moment you start getting mad, if you can start asking yourself some questions, because what happens when you get mad, we all know, right? It's the fight or flight. That's what happens. When you get mad, that's your body goes into that mode, fight or flight. So all the blood leaves your brain and goes into the big muscles of the body. So you can't think properly. So the moment you need to be able to think in your brain the most, all the blood just left it, so it's not functioning properly. But if you are quick enough to ask yourself a couple of questions, then you start making yourself think, and it brings the blood back to your brain. And so, you all kinds of questions. You'll have to come up with your own. But for me, like if it's someone I love or care about my family, the first thing I ask is like, who is this person to me? That's like the first question if I'm getting mad at them. And then I ask if, is this important? How important is this that I'm getting mad about? And then I ask if things could work out perfectly, would that be fine? You know what I mean? Which of course it is. It's a simple question and it seems almost elementary, like I don't even need to do that, but really you do. Because then, like I said, it's bringing your blood back to your brain. It's making you think about things. And now you can think. Because when we get mad, you can't think. I don't care who you are. Some people can still navigate through that. But the reality is you're not thinking clearly and like you should be. So that just asking questions, ask yourself a couple of questions as you're getting mad to slow that down. And it's something that's helped me greatly, in fact.
Now, the first time you went to walk again and when had to go, because now you've done Spartan races, you help others, you train others. I mean, wow, like looking back, I mean, thinking of for yourself, like back to when that happened in the hospital, going through all this recovery to now and doing Spartan races and training people and stuff. How was that progress for yourself? How many setbacks have you had? How did you push through that to continue and get to where you are now?
Well, the process starts with you saying, hey, look, I'm going to take back my life in some manner. Again, I may not be able to do everything exactly the way I did it before, but I'm going to get back to doing it regardless. And so that's what starts that mindset. And then you have to go about taking the steps to do that. For me, getting back to walking was paramount. You know what I mean? To this day, even when I have uh, a phobia, not a phobia, I guess, with the wheelchair. I don't want to be in that wheelchair. You know what I mean? At all. And so I spent a lot of time in that thing in the beginning, and I wanted to get out of it. Then I went to a walker, and then pretty soon I had the strength that I could walk around. And then it was about training more. You know what I mean? And then I went through the amputation in '08. And we thought it would have a good outcome. We really thought that I would have a good outcome because the grafts took the first time. They looked beautiful. They're my own skin. And everybody thought it would be a positive outcome. Now I've had, 4 amputations, 3 revisions afterwards. So setbacks, man, here's reality. I don't care what you're doing. If you think you're going to go through it without any setbacks, you're sadly mistaken. So you should just embrace the suck because it's going to happen. And when you have setbacks, you have to deal with it. So the better and the faster you can deal with that and accept it, okay, I've had a setback. Yes, this sucks, but it's not going to end me. It's not going to beat me, and I'm not going to stop. You have to tell yourself those 3 things and then continue on. You have to be able to reset in that moment of, I just had a setback. And I talk to people about this all the time because, like I said, it doesn't matter what you're doing or what you're going through. You're going to have a setback. It could be at work. It could be at home. It could be in your recovery, any of that and all of it. So you just have to learn to take the punches as they come, right? And you roll with it and you adjust and you keep moving forward. That's, one of the things I learned in the infantry also equates to life because I also learned, even though I went into special operations and you think, oh man, now we're going to be all high speed. When it comes down to doing that hit or taking that objective, it comes down to basic infantry tactics. It's all there is to it. Doesn't matter how much special equipment, no matter how speed we are, no matter how far advanced we get, the reality is you're still going to have to go down there on the boots in the ground and take it, right? It's just reality. And there's going to be setbacks. That's what we have the best made plans, right? What's everybody say about those? Because I can tell you that's why we always leave with 5 plans, because the plan's never going to go to plan, according to plan. It's never going to. That does not happen. So, you have to be aware that you're going to have setbacks, and that you, again, before the ball's hit to you, when that pitcher's throwing the ball, you have to know where you're going to go with the ball when it's hit to you. So you have to know there's going to be some kind of setback, and you're going to have to deal with it. And it's just as simple as that for me.
How do you deal with setbacks that are, I guess, like out of your control? Because there's no growing back limbs, right? There's no way that you could do something to grow back a limb. So that is completely out of your control. And so if something doesn't take, like you said, like you went through 3 to 4 surgeries, when something doesn't take like that and it's completely out of your control, and this is a setback that now you're unsure of what's next, what's going on, how do you prepare for that setback, and how do you re-engage to go towards a new target?
Well, I tell people all the time, certainly the athletes I train, and most of them are disabled, and well, they all are disabled, whether they're a civilian or a first responder or a veteran, they're all disabled. And I tell them all the time, if you're not willing to fight through to get to the other side, you're never going to make it. And that's the part. You got to be able to be willing to fight through to the other side, right? The other thing I always tell people all the time is, one of the things that I've adopted, and I started earlier in life, but certainly through my military career and all this recovery, I have, I wouldn't say perfected or mastered it, but I've made it a lot easier on myself. And so there's one thing I do when things are out of my control. I literally will ask myself, okay, is this in my control? And if the answer is no, then I just automatically do what comes next, because it's a whole lot easier. To sit and whine and cry about it, to get mad about it, to, complain about it, isn't going to do a damn bit of good. It never will. And so that is a policy that I have. I tell my kids, and same thing I tell my athletes, if it's something outside your control, just make it easy on yourself. Do what comes next, because there's nothing you can do about it. If there's something you can do about it, if that answer is yes, then by all means, go do that. But if the answer is no, when you ask yourself, is this in my control? If that answer is no, just do what comes next. Believe me, it would make things so much easier for you.
If you had to give everyday civilians advice on, tapping into untapped potential, to developing that grit, to hit that target that they've been wanting, but maybe aren't aspiring to, or are struggling with aspiring to hit it, what advice do you have, or what exercise or something can they do on the daily to strengthen themselves and become stronger?
Well, one, I would say, if you see something like that, then you should seek out people that are doing it already. Maybe not personally go reach out to them, but their story's out there. You know what I mean? Go research some other people that have done that. And so, and you'll see what they're doing. The other part of it is it comes down to mindset. One, and accountability. You have to be able to hold yourself accountable, right? If you're going to set a goal that you want to do this in this amount of time, then you do that and you hold yourself accountable all the way through that. And if you miss or you don't do it, then you have to reset that and start again. You can never quit. You can never give up. If you don't make it, or for some reason you failed, try it again. Maybe do something differently when you do it, but try it again. And it comes down to, in those moments, it always, and it's the thing we teach in the gym, going out and physically training hard is hard. It's hard physically, but it's more hard mentally. Why? Because you're going to find out where you're willing to quit, right? Or where you start doubting yourself. You learn a lot of things about yourself in that hard training, mentally wise. And that mental wise even crosses over to civilians. You have to be able to hold yourself accountable to that goal, right? And if there's something you want to do, well, there's steps to get there. So identify what those steps are, and then hold yourself accountable to go through each step until you attain that goal. And you do it once, you'd be like when you first teach your kids to do that and they do it the first time, it's like you see that light go on. Wow, that really works. Yes, it does. Because it all starts right here and right here in the heart and in your head, and you have to be able to, that's the biggest thing, holding yourself accountable to those goals. And what I see in most people that don't do that, they don't hold themselves accountable, and they don't have any problem not holding themselves accountable. Oh, well, that wasn't for me, or they'll come up with some other excuse. That's not true. It's because you decided it was too hard for you. That's why. And if you decide it's not too hard, guess what? You're right either way. As we know, I can't or I can. You're right either way because you believe it. You have to believe in it.
It was great talking with you, and that was really epic advice. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for being here on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Gina. It's been a pleasure also. And I hope you get some ticks out of it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone that's listening. Please go like, share, comment, and subscribe. Become a Patreon member so you get access to all our bonus content and our extra goodie episodes that only our Patreons get. And tune in next week for our next episode. Thank you so much for listening.